Would you believe a woman could walk into the forest to clear her head and walk out with something that would change her entire life? Something that didn't speak, didn't beg, but simply looked at her through the trees and broke her heart? In silence, because what she found in that frozen silence wasn't just a dog, it was a soul on the edge of giving up. And what happened next will stay with you for a very, very long time. So tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Because this story deserves to be felt, not just watched, and I want you to feel every bit of it with me as we begin on a cold winter morning in Michigan, where the air hurt to breathe and the woods stood still in their heavy coat of white, untouched except for a pair of old footprints that led to a quiet tragedy waiting to be discovered. The kind of tragedy that wears fur and silence like armor, hoping someone, anyone, might notice before it's too late. And her name was Claire, a 43-year-old woman who had lived a quiet, mostly invisible life for the past year, ever since her father passed away in the very same house where she grew up, leaving behind old books, tools rusted by time, and a strange, haunting loneliness that didn't ask for attention but lingered in corners like cobwebs that refused to be cleaned. And on that morning, she had no grand plan, no spiritual awakening, no deep Instagram quote that told her to get up and go. She simply woke before the sun, put on her late father's oversized wool coat, tied her scarf too tight, and stepped out into the snow as if her body was chasing something her heart hadn't named yet. And she walked past the old wooden fence, past the rusted mailbox with the peeling number 347, into the woods that had always scared her as a child, but now felt oddly welcoming, like the kind of quiet that didn't expect anything from you. And after maybe 20 minutes of walking with the crunch of boots marking time, she stopped, not because she heard something, but because she felt something. A stillness that didn't feel natural, a kind of pause in the world that made her skin tense, and then she saw it. Just beyond the tree line, curled like a question, marked at the base of a tall pine, was a German Shepherd, but not the kind you see on calendars or police canine videos. This one was almost sculpted in frost, his coat stiff with ice, ears down, breath barely visible. And the first thing Claire noticed wasn't the dog itself, but the rope, thick and dirty, knotted clumsily around the tree in his neck. And then her heart did that thing where it drops and rises at the same time because she didn't scream or run. She just stood there whispering, "Oh my God," to no one in particular. And the dog, he didn't bark, didn't growl, he didn't even lift his head fully, just glanced up like he had seen people before and they had always kept walking. And Claire took a step closer, her boots sinking deep into the snow, and another, whispering softly like she was approaching a ghost. "Hey there, hey buddy." And when she finally crouched down in front of him, she could see the scars on his fur, not deep but old, healed without help. And there was a metal bowl tipped over near him, frozen to the ground, like someone had left it for the sake of pretending they cared. And Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a single granola bar she had taken from the kitchen, broke it in half, and placed it on the snow. And for a second, the dog didn't move, didn't react, but then his nose twitched. And he slowly reached forward and took the half in his mouth so gently, it made her eyes sting. And she didn't cry, not yet. She just sat down beside him, not caring that the snow soaked through her jeans, and began whispering things like, "It's okay, now I'm here. You're not alone anymore." Not knowing why she was saying it to a dog, but needing to say it to something, anything, and she loosened the rope slowly, like undoing a trauma knot, and when it came off, he didn't run, didn't move, just laid his head against her boot and closed his eyes. And for the first time in a year, Claire felt like she mattered again. Not because someone told her, but because this freezing animal chose to trust her. And she sat there for nearly an hour, just breathing and being, and then finally said, "Let's go home." And slowly, shakily, he stood, his legs trembling, and followed her step by step, pausing often until they reached the road. And she opened the passenger door of her dad's old truck, hoping he'd understand, and he did, climbed in without a sound. Curling on the seat with a sigh that didn't sound like a dog, it sounded like a person who had been waiting too long to be saved. And as she drove back, She kept glancing at him, and he kept looking forward, like they were both pretending not to feel the thing rising in their chest. And that's how it began. Not with a rescue, not with a headline, but with a woman who didn't know she needed saving, finding a dog who had already given up, and together they created a quiet kind of miracle that would ripple through their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. And if you've ever felt like you were overlooked, forgotten, or too late, I want you to know this story might just be the one that reminds you that healing sometimes begins when you least expect it. Sometimes the one you save ends up saving you right back. Asterisk. They didn't talk on the way home, of course not. One of them couldn't, and the other didn't know how. But there was a silence between them that felt less like emptiness and more like permission. The kind of stillness that doesn't beg to be broken because it's sacred. And as Claire pulled into the gravel driveway of her father's old cabin, the one with peeling blue shutters and a door that always stuck in winter, she looked over at the German Shepherd curled on the passenger seat, his eyes half closed but still watching her like he didn't fully believe she was real yet. And she whispered softly, almost afraid to hear her own voice, "We're home, I guess," not knowing what that word even meant anymore. Not for her, not for him. And she left the truck running for warmth, walked around to open the door for him, and he didn't move at first. Like maybe he thought the moment was too fragile to trust. But when she stepped back and reached out her hand, he slowly uncurled, front paws stretching out first, then his trembling legs finding the frozen ground. And he stood beside her with the kind of cautious dignity that comes from surviving more than you should have to. And together, they walked. Toward the cabin, past the frozen garden, past the rusted wind chimes that hadn't sung in years, up the creaky wooden steps and into the small, quiet house that still smelled faintly of old pipe tobacco and lemon cleaner. Claire knelt down just inside the door, helping him brush the snow from his fur, her fingers moving carefully over the ice and tangles, and the way he looked at her then, not with fear, not quite with gratitude, but with a kind of silent recognition, like he knew something in her had broken too. Her pause and press her forehead gently to his, whispering, "You're safe now. You're okay. I promise." And that word, promise, it echoed somewhere deep inside her, because she hadn't made one in a long time. Not since her father's last night in the hospital, when she'd whispered she'd be okay. Even though she wasn't, and in the hours that followed, she gave him a warm towel, an old flannel blanket, a can of chicken soup poured into a bowl. Because she didn't have dog food yet, and he ate slowly, as if every bite needed permission. And when she finally sat down on the old floral couch, he walked over and curled up at her feet, one paw resting gently on her boot like a bookmark saving a chapter they hadn't finished yet. And she didn't sleep that night, not really. Just listened to his breathing, watched the rise and fall of his body in the amber glow of the fireplace. And somewhere around 4 a.m., when the wind howled outside and the world felt like it had disappeared beneath a layer of snow and memory, she said aloud, "You need a name." And he didn't react, of course. But her voice sounded steadier than it had in months. And she thought of all the names her father had once suggested for the dog they never got. Ranger, Max, King, but none of them felt right until she whispered Ash, and the word landed gently between them, soft and smoky. And when she said it again, Ash, his ears perked just a little, and that was enough, because sometimes names are less about what you call something and more about what you need to say. And in the days that followed, Claire and Ash settled into something resembling a rhythm. Not quite routine, but steady enough to feel safe, and she found herself waking up earlier, walking him through the woods that used to scare her, now softened by the sound of his paws beside her, and she noticed things she hadn't in years. The way the snow sparkled like crushed glass in the morning light, the way the trees leaned toward each other like they were sharing secrets. And Ash, he never pulled on the leash, never barked without reason, never made a sound unless he was dreaming, but he watched her, always, with eyes that seemed to read her thoughts before she even spoke them, and it was during one of those walks, maybe a week after that first morning, that something shifted, not in the forest, but in Claire. Because as they passed the bend near the old footbridge where the creek froze over in winter, Ash stopped, not in fear, not in excitement, but with a kind of purposeful alertness, and when she followed his gaze, she saw a small figure sitting on the bridge, legs swinging over the edge, bundled in a purple coat and mismatched boots, and as they got closer, the girl looked up, no older than 11, her cheeks red from the cold, and she smiled wide. "Is that your dog?" And Claire, surprised by the question and the presence of anyone out here, said sort of, and the girl slid down from the bridge and knelt beside Ash without hesitation. Running her mittened hands gently over his head, "He's beautiful," she said, and Ash, who had never leaned in to touch before, did just that, resting his head against her arm like he'd known her all his life. And Claire asked carefully, "Are you out here alone?" And the girl shrugged. "My house is just down the trail. I come here when my mom's yelling," and Claire didn't know what to say to that. But Ash did, curling himself around the girl like a shield, and they stayed there, the three of them, until the sun dipped low and the cold returned, and before leaving, the girl whispered, "You're lucky to have him." And Claire watched her disappear down the trail with a mix of sadness and something like hope, because maybe Ash wasn't just here for her. Maybe he was here for others too, a quiet guardian, a silent thread weaving broken people together. And that night, she added another log to the fire, and Ash rested his head in her lap. Claire looked at the pawprint he'd left in the snow by the bridge, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like a background character in her own story. She felt present, she felt needed, and as she traced the line of Ash's ears with her fingers, she whispered, "You found me, didn't you?" And he didn't move, but she knew the answer, because sometimes the ones who save us don't come with sirens or signs. They come quietly, wrapped in fur and silence, and they teach us, without a single word, how to begin again. Some stories don't unfold all at once, they whisper their way into our lives, piece by piece, until one morning you wake up and realize the silence in your home isn't heavy anymore. It's soft, like a blanket instead of a wall. And that's what began to happen to Claire. Slowly, gently, like snow melting in spring. She started to feel like herself again, not the version that was numb and waiting, but the one who hummed while washing dishes, who remembered to buy milk, who smiled when she saw Pawprints by the door. Because Ash wasn't just healing, he was teaching her how to live again. With his quiet patience and steady gaze, with his head tilted at the exact moments she felt most unsure, with the way he followed her from room to room like a shadow with purpose. Never intrusive, always present. And she found herself talking to him like he could understand every word. Like her thoughts were safer when spoken into the space between his ears. She'd say things like, "I think I'm ready to clean out the garage." Or maybe we could start walking earlier, now that the sun's up longer. Ash would respond the only way he knew how, with a tilt of his head, a soft blink, or a gentle sigh, and it was enough. But just when it felt like the pieces were finally fitting, life did what it always does. It shifted, not with violence, not with some dramatic storm, but with a knock at the door on a Wednesday afternoon. The kind of knock that makes your stomach turn because you weren't expecting anyone and you weren't prepared for anything. And when Claire opened the door, wiping her hands on a towel, she saw two figures standing on the porch. A man in a uniform and a woman in a tan trench coat, not unfriendly but not casual either. And the man, a local deputy, introduced himself with a nod, while the woman, whose badge flashed briefly from her lapel, said "Animal Control." And Claire's heart dropped, just enough to make her hands tremble slightly, because somewhere deep down, she already knew why they were there, and the woman continued. "We received an anonymous tip about a dog found tied in the woods near County Road 9. German Shepherd, possibly abandoned," and Claire, trying to sound calm, said, "Yes, that was him. He's inside, he's safe now." But the woman's eyes didn't soften. "Ma'am, do you mind if we come in and take a look?" Claire stepped aside, the air between them tightening like thread, and Ash, sensing something was different, stood at the threshold of the living room, ears alert, not aggressive, just aware. And when he saw the strangers, he didn't bark. He didn't run. He walked calmly to Claire's side and sat, like he knew she needed him steady, and the woman crouched slightly, observing him with practiced eyes, murmuring, "He looks good." "Better than most in these cases," and Claire said. "He was freezing, tied to a tree with nothing but a bowl. No food, no shelter. I couldn't just leave him." And the woman nodded slowly. "We understand, but we need to check for a microchip." Just to be sure, and Claire felt something cold spread through her chest, because the idea that Ash belonged to someone else, someone who had left him in that condition, felt like a betrayal wrapped in bureaucracy. But she nodded, and the woman pulled out a small handheld scanner, approached Ash carefully, and when the device beeped, Claire's breath caught in her throat, because she had hoped somehow irrationally that there would be nothing, no record, no name. But there was, and the woman stood, reading from the screen. "His name is Coda, registered to a James Halpern address listed in Detroit, about 3 hours east." And Claire whispered Coda, tasting the name like something foreign on her tongue. She knelt beside Ash, placing her hand on his chest, whispering, "Is that you?" And he didn't flinch, didn't react, just leaned into her like always, like nothing had changed. And the deputy cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, we'll need to contact the owner, confirm the circumstances." And Claire, blinking hard, asked, "And if he wants him back?" And the woman's voice softened just slightly. "We'll investigate. We won't return him if there's evidence of abuse or neglect, I promise." And with that, they left. Promising updates, leaving behind a house that suddenly felt too quiet again. And Claire sat on the floor beside Ash, wrapping her arms around him, whispering over and over, "You're not going back. Not if I can help it." She barely slept, barely ate, just watched the phone and tried to act normal for Ash's sake. But inside, she was unraveling, not because she was afraid of losing him, but because she had already realized she couldn't. Not now, not after everything. And on the third morning, the call came. And the woman from Animal Control said calmly, "We spoke with Mr. Halpern. He claims he rehomed Coda months ago to someone outside the city. Said he couldn't care for him anymore, but didn't give us a name or any proof. And when we pushed, he got evasive." And Claire clutched the phone tighter, asking, "So what happens now?" And the woman paused, then said, "Given the lack of evidence and your willingness to care for him, we're not pursuing reclamation. The dog is legally yours now if you're still willing." And Claire didn't realize she was crying until she heard herself laugh through the tears, whispering, "Yes, yes, of course." And after she hung up, she sat beside Ash on the porch steps, watching the snow melt slowly along the roofline, and said, "Looks like we get to keep writing our story, huh?" And Ash leaned his head into her lap, eyes closing with a peace she hadn't seen in him before. And Claire, for the first time in what felt like years, felt solid, like her feet were on the ground, and her heart was no longer floating in grief. She whispered, "No more trees, no more ropes, just home." And it wasn't just a promise. It was a vow, sealed not with words, but with the quiet exhale of a dog who had waited too long to be chosen, and the quiet breath of a woman who had finally chosen herself. There's a kind of peace that comes when the worst is behind you and you're finally allowed to exhale. Not all at once, but in small, steady breaths that don't tremble anymore. And that's what life started to feel like for Claire and Ash. Days blending gently into each other, not boring, but safe, like a song you never grow tired of. And with the cold finally easing its grip on Michigan, the forest around them began to thaw. First with the soft dripping of snow from the pines, then the crack of branches underfoot, and eventually the faintest green breaking through the ground like hope in slow motion. And Ash, now fully recovered in body, but still quiet in soul, began exploring more on their walks, sniffing tree roots, chasing the occasional squirrel, always circling back to Claire like she was his compass. And she started leaving the front door open when she made tea, letting the breeze and birdsong fill the kitchen. And with that openness came something unexpected. People. Not crowds, not noise, but faces, one by one. Drawn by something they couldn't name, like warmth leaking from the cabin after a long freeze. And it began with the girl from the bridge. Her name was Ivy, and one afternoon she returned. Not with fear, but with purpose, holding out a crumpled drawing of Ash she'd made with colored pencils. And Claire invited her in, not just because it felt right, but because it felt necessary. Like the next note in a melody that was already playing, and Ivy talked nonstop. About school and music and how her mom wasn't really mean, just tired, and Ash laid beside her the entire time, tail thumping softly, occasionally lifting his head when she laughed too loud. And from there the ripples grew. Ivy's mom came next, sheepishly standing on the porch with a container of soup, saying thank you without saying thank you, and then came others. Widowed veteran who'd seen Ash at the edge of town and said he reminded him of a dog he lost in Afghanistan. A teenage boy who asked if he could photograph Ash for a school project about resilience. A woman who ran a rescue shelter and wanted to learn how Claire had gotten him to trust again, and slowly. This house that had once been filled only with the sounds of grief and the creak of old floors became a kind of quiet sanctuary. Not a busy place, but a meaningful one, and Claire, who had once been afraid of connection, now found herself baking extra muffins just in case, setting out chairs on the porch even when no one was coming, and one afternoon, as she sat with Ivy and her mom Ash curled at their feet, the conversation drifted to the idea of second chances. And Ivy's mom said softly, "Sometimes I think I needed someone to find me too." And no one said anything for a moment, just listened to the wind and the hum of something unspoken but understood. And Claire realized something then, something big, something fragile. Ash wasn't the only one who had been tied to something. And left in the cold, she had too. Only her rope wasn't physical. It was made of old promises, unresolved pain, and the heavy silence of pretending to be fine. And now, with every gentle moment, every shared cup of tea or walk through the woods, that rope was unraveling. It's not violently, but with grace. And one evening, as the sun painted the trees in gold, Claire pulled out an old notebook from the drawer, one she hadn't touched since her father passed, and began to write, not a journal, not poetry, just memories, scattered thoughts. And in the margins, she sketched Ash, always Ash. And she wrote things like, "The day I found you wasn't the day I saved you. It was the day you started saving. Me and home isn't walls. It's breathing beside someone who won't leave." And those words poured out of her like water from a dam that had been waiting for spring. And the next morning, she printed one of those pages and pinned it on the local coffee shop's bulletin board, under the heading "To the One Who Waited," and within a week, it had been shared over 100 times on Facebook. People leaving comments like this made me cry, "Thank you," and I thought I was the only one who felt this way. And the story of Ash, the dog who had once been abandoned, tied to a tree in the snow with no voice, was now giving voice to people who had never felt seen before. And Claire wasn't chasing attention. She didn't want viral. She wanted real, and it was real, painfully and beautifully real. And yet, even in all this goodness, something inside her still wondered about Ash's past. Not the part with the rope or the bowl or the cold, but the part before, when he had a name and maybe a family. And so she called the animal control officer again, the one who had come to her door weeks earlier and asked, "Do you have any more information?" Not to return him, just to understand. And the woman said she'd see what she could find, and a few days later, Claire received an envelope, no note, just a few printed pages, Ash's former vet records, an intake form from a city shelter, dated over a year ago, and one blurry photo of a younger Ash with a little boy holding him tight, both of them smiling so wide it made her chest ache, and written on the back in a child's handwriting were the words, "My best friend Coda," and Claire sat with that photo for a long time, not crying, just holding it, wondering what had happened to that boy, why Coda became Ash, and why love, sometimes, isn't enough to keep someone safe. And she didn't tell anyone about the picture, not yet. Just placed it gently in her drawer beside the notebook, a quiet reminder that every beginning comes from something ending. And as the days grew warmer and Ash's fur began to shed for spring, Claire looked at the path they had taken from rope to rescue, from silence to belonging, and knew there was still more to come, because stories like this, the ones that change you, don't end when the dog is safe or the woman is healed. They keep going. Through the people they touch, the hearts they soften, and the hands they hold open for someone else. And if you're still here, still watching, still listening, I want to ask you, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Because maybe, just maybe, your story is about to begin too. There's a moment in every real story, not the kind made for headlines or fairy tales, but the kind that lives quietly in people's hearts. When the weight of everything you've survived begins to lift, not because the pain is gone, but because love finally stayed, and that moment came for Claire and Ash one Sunday morning. When the sky was clear and the grass held just enough dew to sparkle under the rising sun, and Claire, still in her robe, stood barefoot on the porch, holding her coffee with both hands, watching Ash run through the yard like he hadn't been on the edge of death not long ago, chasing a red ball Ivy had brought him, pausing now and then to look back at her with those eyes that always said more than words ever could. And something inside her whispered, "This is it, this is home." Not the house or the porch or the routine, but the stillness in her chest that didn't ache anymore. The way her hands didn't shake when she reached out to touch him. The way her mind didn't loop old regrets when she closed her eyes at night. Because somehow in saving a dog left for dead in the snow, she had rescued herself from the quiet kind of sorrow no one talks about, the kind that looks like functioning but feels like fading, and now she was here. Fully, beautifully here, with muddy paw prints on the kitchen floor and dog hair on her sweaters and warmth in places that had been cold for too long. And as Ash trotted back toward her ball in his mouth, tail wagging, she whispered, "You want to go on a little trip?" And his ears perked in that perfect triangle of curiosity, because he didn't know what she meant, but he trusted her. And that afternoon, they packed a small bag, some treats, water, the red ball, and the photo, the one of Ash, then Coda. With the little boy and Claire drove, not fast, not slow, just steady. Heart ticking in rhythm with the miles, past towns that blurred by like old memories. Past farms and traffic lights and rows of mailboxes, till she reached the address on the paper tucked into her glove compartment. A suburban street in Detroit lined with identical houses and overgrown lawns, and she parked at the corner, pulse climbing into her throat because she didn't know what she was walking into. Only that she needed to see it through. Not for her, not even for Ash, but for the little boy in the photo who once called this dog his best friend. And as they walked together toward the house, Ash alert but calm, a woman stepped out onto the porch, holding a baby monitor in one hand and a bottle in the other, pausing. When she saw them, her eyes flicking to the dog, then to Claire, and she said softly, "You found him, not a question, not an accusation." Just the kind of statement that hangs in the air like dust in sunlight, and Claire nodded, unable to speak for a moment, and then said, "I think he saved me," and the woman who looked older now, more tired, more fragile than the woman, in Claire's imagination sat on the top step and placed the monitor beside her, gesturing for Claire to sit too, and they talked, not about the why, not about the abandonment or the rope or the snow, but about the boy, Mason, who had gotten sick 2 winters ago, who had loved Coda more than anything, who had cried when they had to move and couldn't bring the dog because of landlord rules and hospital trips and bills that swallowed everything. And Claire listened, not judging, just hearing. And when the woman finally said, "I didn't know what else to do," Claire said, "He waited." And that word waited cracked something between them, because it carried every second of cold, every hour tied to a tree, every breath taken alone under a sky too quiet. And Ash stepped forward, sitting gently beside the woman, resting his head on her knee, and she wept quietly, like someone remembering the sound of a voice they hadn't heard in too long. And Claire placed the photo on the step between them and said, "I think he remembered," and they sat like that, the 3 of them, for what felt like an hour, and then Claire stood, heart full of something too big to name, and said, "I just thought you should know." And the woman said, "Thank you for loving him." And Claire replied, "He made it easy," and they left, driving back into the fading light. Ash resting his head on the center console, eyes half closed, and when they pulled into the gravel driveway hours later, the stars already blinking into the night, Claire said, "You're home, Ash. This is your forever now." And he licked her hand once before jumping down and padding up the steps, like he'd never belonged anywhere else. And over the next few weeks, something even more surprising began to happen. People started showing up, not just because of Ash, but because of the story, the photo Claire had posted, the line she'd written that had now been shared thousands of times. He was tied to a tree, but never stopped waiting for someone to come back. And the comments poured in, not just likes or shares, but confessions of people who had lost dogs, of women who had felt invisible, of men who had forgotten how to cry, and they came. Some just to see Ash, some to leave letters, treats, donations to local shelters, and one afternoon, Ivy helped Claire build a small wooden sign to place at the base of the old tree where she had first found him, painted with soft blue letters that read, "Waited here, found there. Loved forever," and that tree, once the symbol of abandonment, now became a place people came to feel less alone. And Claire didn't chase the attention, didn't seek credit. She just kept the kettle warm, the porch cleaned, and her heart open, because she knew now with unshakable certainty that this wasn't a rescue story, it was a redemption story, not just for a dog, but for every broken piece of herself she thought she'd buried too deep to find again. And if you're still here, still listening, I want you to ask yourself something. Is there someone, somewhere, waiting for you to untie the rope you didn't know you were wrapped in? Could it be that your healing begins the moment you choose to walk toward something instead of away from it? And maybe, just maybe, the love you give, the small kindness you offer, the broken soul you shelter, whether on 2 legs or 4, might end up becoming the miracle someone else has been hoping for all along. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Stories like this don't just live on screens. They live in the quiet things we do for each other, and maybe today, yours begins.